Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Listening is Caring, Lead with Your Ears. My name is Danielle Olivier, Business Development Manager at AccuSource, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's presenter, Chris Dyer, Chief Marketing Officer. Chris Dyer is a best-selling author, radio show host, and Chief Marketing Officer at People G2, an AccuSource company. As a highly sought-after keynote speaker, consultant, and advisor, Chris brings a unique perspective from his experience in building, leading, and exiting successful organizations. Through his research from 2 best-selling books, he is continuously engaged in leading companies to help transform their culture, leadership, and flexible work strategies. Chris is the founder of People G2, a fully remote organization routinely ranked one of the best places to work. People G2 has been listed 5 times as one of Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing companies. I will now turn the presentation over to Chris.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm excited to be back. Thank you for AccuSource and People G2 for having me come back and present some more of the content that I love to deliver the most, and talking about culture, talking about things that really matter to our leaders, to our people. And listening is one of those foundational, kind of the most important things that we have to get right in any organization. So we're going to run through this. I'd love your thoughts, your perspectives, things that may be happening in your company as we go through this or at the end. And as Danielle said, we're happy to send you a copy of the presentation and also the recording in case this can be helpful to you, to your team or your organization down the line. So you're welcome to use this as well. So I'm really proud of all of the things that we've been able to do to help our organization become a stellar one. And we know that through g2.com and other resources, we consistently rank very high in customer satisfaction with our customers, and that's great. But also what's really important to me is that our employees are happy. And we know that that has been a consistent thing that we've seen being a best place to work year after year after year. And I think that our focus, as one of the very first things we did on trying to be better listeners, is the thing that has helped us be really good with our employees, and has also helped us be get these awards and be really connected to our clients as well. Because if we don't really understand the problem, we don't really hear what people are saying, it's hard for us to shift and make changes that really matter. And so I'm going to dig into that today for you. Of course, doing that then turns into being a fastest growing company, which, anybody who's running a business would love to have great growth and great employees and happy clients. That is the dream. And we've been able to do that, and we get lots of attention on the interwebs. And so I'm going to kind of really bring you forward to those important things. So there are really 7 pillars of cultural success that if your company is going to do culture really well, if you're going to be one of the greats, you have to get these 7 things right. And listening is one of those pillars. I said, I think it's one of the most important pillars. And it's the thing that companies can really change very quickly. They can go from struggling to being very good very quickly if they work on particular parts of it. But it's also an area that we see that can really change quickly, right? You can go from being good to being bad. You can bring in a couple new managers and suddenly you're struggling. So listening is something that we have to be working on all the time. It's not like we have one initiative for 3 months and then everything's great and hunky-dory. It's one of those things, it's almost like working out or being on the treadmill, right? If we want to be in shape, we have to continue to work at it all the time. So listening, what do I really want here? What am I really talking about? Let me give you a quick story. The Super Bowl right before the pandemic, whenever that was, it feels like a million years ago. I had a bunch of friends over to watch the game, and we were sitting around, and we're probably talking during the game because everyone is quiet during the commercials, right? Paying attention then, but I think it was probably during the game we weren't really paying attention. And a buddy of mine was telling us that he was getting ready to go to Yosemite to go camping with his family. And the more he talked about this, the more people were talking about how they had been to Yosemite, talked about camping, talked about the best sleeping bags. I mean, the conversation was really revolving around camping. And I noticed that my friend was seemed a little frustrated. He seemed like he kept coming back to this conversation, and I thought, "Well, what's this? What's this all about? What's going on?" And I turned to him and said, "What are you really trying to tell us? What's really going on here?" And he finally was able to articulate he wasn't worried about camping. He wasn't worried about Yosemite. He wasn't worried about sleeping bags. He was worried about being in that place for a whole week with his family with no Wi-Fi, no cell phone coverage. What was he going to do with the kids? You know, they're used to having their tablets and their phones. Like, were they going to go crazy? Were they going to be okay? And so here, everyone thought he was asking about camping, but what he really was talking about was his fear about being there without any Wi-Fi or technology, right? And so there was a disconnect there, and it took us asking good questions to really find out what was really going on and what he really was worried about. And it reminded me so often of work when people are telling you they're struggling with something, and if we don't ask good questions and if we don't talk to them in a specific way or really listen, we're not hearing what they're really telling us. Which brings me to one of my funnest questions I think that we've ever asked on a webinar or any of the talks that I do, the keynotes that I do. And you may have been on a keynote of mine or a webinar of mine and heard this before, but that's okay. If you already know the answer, you can still let us know. And we'd love to you can throw it in the chat if you want. But the quiz is, if the man in yellow is talking and the man in red is listening, so let's say I came to my boss and I wanted to tell my boss something, right? Who's in charge of what's the meaning of what's being said? So the man in yellow is talking. Is he responsible for what the meaning is? Or is it the man in red? Think about that for a second. If you have an answer, throw it in the chat. That's great. Um, the answer may surprise you. It's actually the man in red. So even though the man in yellow is the one saying whatever it is he's thinking, feeling, wanting to discuss, the meaning, what's coming through, is actually going through all the filters, all of the biases, all of the things that are going on, all the distractions in the man in red's brain. And so it is his job, or your job as the listener in a conversation, to make sure you understand what is really being meant by that person and checking, making sure, really connecting to make sure you got it right, not just assuming you understand what they're saying, assuming that you got the gist of what their concern is. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways to do that here today, because this is so important. This is where I find a lot of struggling leaders, new leaders, people with maybe big and complex teams, they struggle with this the most. I say, I don't understand. I talked to so-and-so. I thought I understood what they wanted. They still aren't happy. There's still this issue. We still aren't getting along. We're still not connecting. And it's because you're not really understanding what they're meaning. And they're probably not telling you correctly. They're probably delivering it in an inconsistent and maybe the less than ideal way. But it's your job as the listener to get it right. So if we take that responsibility on, we can take some of these ideas that I'm going to present today and really be able to put them into action. So how do we begin to be a better listener? What are some of the basic things that we need to do? Well, first of all, there's a mindset here. If you believe that you are not a good listener, if you believe that your boss is not a good listener, if you believe that people around you, if you have this sort of fixed mindset that maybe good listening is not possible, it's going to be difficult to change that. Now, specifically about you. So let's take on the mindset that we are going to be great listeners. We are going to do what it takes to be great listeners. And that is a responsibility, that is a goal that we are going to take on right now. Then we need to make sure that we trust what is being told to us. What is it that people are telling us that we trust what they are telling us, but we validate? And what I mean by that is, if you have distrust, if you think people are intentionally not telling you things or being deceitful, it's really hard to be a good listener. So unless somebody has proven to you time and time and time again that they're going to be dishonest. We want to trust what we're hearing, but then validate that and say, this is what I think you're telling me, and here's how we're going to validate that. And then we want to use the 2-to-1 rule. And you may have heard this before, but I got some big ears here, so I learned this a long time ago. You want to use both of your ears and the one of your mouth, which means we want to be listening twice as much as we're talking. At the very least, when you go to a meeting, if you put this into action, if you make sure you are listening at least twice as much as you're talking, you will already put yourself in a better position to hear other people, to make sure they feel heard, to make sure you're being a good listener. A lot of times we go into meetings and we're worried that people aren't going to hear us, and they're not going to remember what we said, and we're not going to get that point across that we needed to make, and that turns us into bad listeners because we're spending all of our time and energy trying to get our point, our perspective, our anxiety dealt with in that moment, instead of slowing down, making sure we hear others. When they feel heard, they feel validated, they're more open and accepting to hearing what we have to say as well. Now, the other thing we need to do is make sure that they are physically ready. So this is something I've talked about before, but if they are hungry, if they are hot or cold, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to, I don't mean like they're going to put their fingers in their ears like that picture shows, but subconsciously, they're not going to hear you. There's some incredible research that Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman did on judges in Israel, parole judges, and what they found, they wanted to try to figure out, why did they say yes or no to someone getting out of jail? And the scary findings were that the hungrier the judge was, the more likely they were to say no. And so closer beginning of the day, right after lunch, was the times they got the most yeses, and the hungrier that judge was, the more they were likely to say no. They did some other research and found that people were more likely to say yes or to be open or to listen when their temperature was correct, when they felt comfortable. If they were too hot, if they were freezing cold, their brain was worried about that. I'm sure you've all seen that Snickers commercial where somebody's acting like a jerk, and like it's like a celebrity, like it's Danny DeVito or it's somebody, and they say, "Here, eat a Snickers." Well, that commercial is funny, but it's also really tying into this cognitive bias. This is really a real life situation. So if you want people to hear you, don't call a meeting right before lunch, right? This is why we take clients out to dinner. This is why we connect with people in a comfortable setting. If your office is freezing cold or that conference room is freezing cold, maybe meet somewhere else where they're going to be more comfortable. They're more likely to be open and listen to you, and for you to be able to hear them as well. That's just as important. One of the other really important things that I learned years ago actually happened at the safari park in Escondido, California. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but this is a really cool place where most of the animals are out free. They sort of walk in this giant Serengeti type area. It's a gigantic place. And the smaller animals, of course, don't get to walk free, but they're literally large areas. It's very different than a typical zoo. And I got to stay the night with my daughter and my oldest son, and in these tents. And you wake up in the night, you hear the lions roaring, and it's fun and exciting and scary all at the same time. But before we went to bed, we went around the campfire, and a lot of the scientists from the park brought out these different animals, and they talked about them, and the kids got to learn, and we asked questions. They brought out this funny looking dude called a jerboa. I don't know if anyone have ever heard of a jerboa, I've ever seen this kind of an animal. I had never seen it. And I asked everyone, what do you think it is? And some people said, well, it kind of looks like a rabbit because it's got these big floppy ears. You can kind of see the babies look a little bit very rabbit-like. Some people said, well, maybe it's like a kangaroo or a marsupial. It's got those big hind legs there. And the scientist said, you're all actually falling into this kind of brain trick, this thing this cognitive bias that happens with human beings. When we ask you something to make a conclusion about something new, your brain naturally goes back and grabs whatever information it already has to make a conclusion. Well, I know what a rabbit is. I know what a kangaroo is. Maybe this is some version of a rabbit or a kangaroo or both, right? I didn't stop to possibly ponder the fact that maybe I've never seen this. Maybe I don't know what this is. Maybe the answer should be I don't know. But we don't do that. Our brain's always trying to make shortcuts for us. So immediately we say rabbit, we say kangaroo, we say rabbit and a kangaroo got together, you know, and it turns out this is just a rat. This is basically closer to a rat than anything else, and it just evolved over time to have those big ears and the hind legs. It's not a marsupial. And so it was a really important lesson that if people don't have all the information to make a good conclusion, they will A, make a bad conclusion, B, they're unable to to recognize the fact that they may need to know more. So when we're listening and we hear just a couple things and we make assumptions, we're going to make bad conclusions. So we need to ask better questions, ask to get more information before we get to those final conclusions, so we really understand the meaning, we really understand what that person is saying. Because it's so easy, like I said in that first story, to say, oh, you're going to Yosemite, you're camping, you must be worried about camping. Not, oh, you're worried about dealing with your kids 24 hours a day without technology, right? So this example really highlighted for me. It was like this giant light bulb went off, and I realized how often disagreements, misunderstandings were happening at work because people didn't have all the information and they were making bad conclusions too early in the process. So make sure we remember you don't know what you don't know. Keep reminding yourself of that. What you don't know would fill all the libraries in the world, right? We only know a fraction of the things that are possible out there to even know. Want to make sure that we remember this sort of the confirmation bias. I don't know if anyone knows what confirmation bias is, but it's really why social media is so popular and so destructive at the same time. If we go back and only look for information that validates our opinion, what we believe to be true, then we ignore all the other facts that may be telling us something else could be happening, right? In this example, I could see rabbit features, I can see kangaroo features. This must be a rabbit or a kangaroo, and that was confirmation bias. This is just a rat, right? I need to be open to other facts, other information. And then make sure that we also lead with bad news. So another kind of interesting thing that's happening if we want to deliver information to people and make sure that they're being heard is we want to try to start with bad news versus good news. I know this sounds a little maybe counterintuitive, and a lot of you may be doing what we love to call the crap sandwich, which is good news, bad news, good news. That unfortunately sets people up for, well, something's bad, they're going to bring up something bad, or they didn't really mean that good stuff. Okay, so we can kind of deal with some of these confirmation biases by making sure, again, with confirmation bias, we're looking for other facts, being open to other ideas. We have to talk difficult with people. We need to start with bad news, then go into good news. And people actually rate their experiences better when we end with good news than when we start with good news. There's a lot of data around that as well, which really helps people feel more comfortable in continuing to tell us how they really feel and what's really going on. And there's even more cognitive biases we should be thinking about that really play into being good listeners. So the other one is the fundamental attribution error. This is if you walk down the street and I bumped into you and I didn't say I was sorry and maybe I was on the cell phone, and you might say to me, well, I'm just a rude man, or I'm a rude white man, or I'm a rude 40-something, or I'm a whatever you could physically determine about me. You might just say I'm rude because of something you could observe, something external, right? I, on the other hand, might have said, well, I didn't say I was sorry because I was talking to my mom and she was really ill and she said something, and she needed my help. And I didn't have time to stop and say, I had an internal excuse. This is a super important fact that I would like you all to remember, that people give themselves an excuse. They view their behaviors with internal excuses or internal reasons all the time. I was blunt on that email because I was busy. Whereas the person getting the email is like, well, that was really blunt. They're doing that because they are rude, because they are this or that. They have some external reason. So we need to remember not to judge people on the external. Try to find the internal reason of what's going on. If someone was being mean to you, someone bumped into you, someone sent you an email that was out of character, go back and assume it's internal. Hey, what's going on with you? Hey, are you okay? I got this email. It didn't seem like it was really you. What's going on? How can I help? What's, where do we need to take a step back here? Are you frustrated about something? This is how we uncover the real meaning. This is how we uncover what's really going on instead of stopping and then fighting about, well, I didn't like how you talked to me. I didn't like the email you sent to me, but we never got to why that happened, right? And remembering that people are seeing our behaviors often through external lenses. And if we have something going on internally, that we're open and we're honest about that so that people can really understand. The halo effect is another interesting one where people will assume that good-looking people or famous people or successful people are going to be more likely to be better or to make a better decision. This is why Brad Pitt is, selling watches, or um, uh, somebody really beautiful might be selling perfume or something like this, right? We make this assumption that they know better. Inside of work, this happens all the time, that someone who did a really good job on one project suddenly gets thrown on another. They may not necessarily be the right person. That someone who dresses really nice might get more opportunities than someone who doesn't. Sometimes this is just the natural thing that's going to happen, but if you're aware of this, you can make sure that you're not making decisions that are going to cause you problems going down the path if you're allowing that halo effect, that certain performance or certain appearance, to override maybe other factors that are going on. And then the other one's called the availability heuristic, and it's a little bit what I talked about with the Jerboa, that things that you have in your brain sort of get into that conclusion. But also this tells us that sometimes recent information gets priority over older information, and that isn't necessarily better. Recent isn't necessarily better. It's just more recent. So we want to ensure that if there's recent information that is being used to make decisions or to impact behaviors, that we question that thoroughly to make sure it is as important as the rest of the information that we have going on. Simple example, if someone suddenly starts acting like a jerk, but they've always been really nice to you, you might say, well, geez, what's going on? Is this person struggling, right? This person has been a jerk to you the entire time you've known them, and suddenly they're being sweet to you. You might go, they want something, right? So we want to judge that new information differently. Now, in those examples, that makes very clear sense. But when we're talking about other types of behaviors and communication styles, it's harder to see sometimes. All right, so what are some of the other areas that we can really work to be, I would say probably more tactical, more down to earth ways that we can think about being better listeners? Well, the first one is to ensure that if we're going to have a conversation with someone, we're going to really make sure we're listening. We want to reduce noise. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone and they say, I tried to talk to this person and I had a really bad outcome and didn't work. And I was like, okay, so tell me where you met. Oh, well, I sat in front of their cubicle, or we were meeting in a Starbucks, or like it was just noise and it wasn't private, and like it was a really bad setting, right? We want to meet with someone in the right setting. We can reduce noise. We want to remove our devices, put those cell phones away, not just down, but away. Close those laptops. We want to show that person, I'm listening, right? I hear you. I'm focusing on you in this moment. Uh, I've noticed some of the best leaders and the best politicians and the best trainers. These are people that, like, when you talk to them, you feel like the rest of the world doesn't even exist. They are just so focused in on what you're saying in that moment. You feel like you could tell them anything. That's the kind of listening we want to be doing. And that's because we have to remove the noise and the devices. Um, Sometimes we may need to ask them for their attention. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe we're good, but they seem distracted. We may need to say, hey, it's really important that I hear you. I want to really understand what's going on, but maybe you could put away your phone, or maybe whatever's going on. Let's just really focus here for 5-10 minutes, because I really want to hear what you have to say. People often just need our help to do what they should have done naturally anyways, to be better communicators. And of course, continue to model the behavior. So if we want people to be good listeners, the better listeners we can be to them, the more likely they are to return that favor, to see what we're doing, and to really pick up on those behaviors. Now, it is a little bit true on Zoom and Teams and webinars and things like that. Really, really true in person. Body language has a huge impact on whether or not people think you're listening. If you have your camera off, if you have your camera on but you're staring over here, in a virtual setting, people are going to assume maybe you're not listening. If you are in person, and for body language, you don't give them a good proper greeting, looking them in their eyes, shaking their hands properly, or whatever that proper greeting is, they might not think you're not really wanting to be there. We want to directly face that person. Okay, if we're in a situation where they want to really be heard. Sometimes sitting next to someone in a conflict situation or at a negotiating standpoint can be a really good technique. But if someone really needs to be heard, we want to be sitting face to face to them, so they really feel like you're listening. We want to have good eye contact. I've often had people say how much eye contact is enough, and I say just enough that you don't feel like you're staring, or they don't feel like you're staring at them. And that's a pretty subjective answer, I know, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. And in person, we want to try to have our palms up, arms and legs uncrossed. If you're sitting like this or you're crossed, again, if you're cold and you're crossing your arms just because you're cold, people are going to think you're not listening. Palms down, even like on the desk, will show people they think that you're not listening. So if we can have our palms up, that shows people we're open. So some of these basic little techniques just signal to the other person, I'm listening, I'm willing to hear you, before they even say a word. Because imagine if you came in and you told your boss, I really need to talk to you, and they have their arms crossed, they're not looking at you, they're checking your phone, all that stuff. You don't think they're listening, right? Even if they really were. And then we want to focus on active listening. So what is active listening? Have any of you, as you're listening to somebody, in that example I gave, right, at the very beginning, where someone starts telling you something and immediately you start listening to respond? Oh, you go camping? I've been camping. Oh, you're going to Yosemite? I've been to Yosemite. And that's not really what they're talking about. So we want to listen to be active listeners, not trying to just respond to somebody, but really listening to what they're saying. Make sure we don't finish the other person's sentences. Let them finish. Let them get it all out. We want to notice the little things. Sometimes if you can focus in on a small detail, repeat something back you heard that was a small thing. Maybe they mentioned it was a very beautiful day when you started the day, and then things all went to hell afterwards. And so some detail, right? Some little things that you notice, that can help people understand that you're really listening to them. Make sure you do your part as you're listening and you don't judge. Eventually you may need to judge, but don't judge while you're listening. Be open, don't make assumptions, hear them out all the way through. You may get down to the end, you've heard them all the way through, you have all the information, and you may realize they're struggling, or they may need some advice, or they may need to change their behaviors. That's okay, but hear them out all the way through. We often start judging right away, right? We start putting labels on things. We start trying to pick apart their behaviors instead of hearing them out all the way. And don't forget that it's okay to pause in a conversation. It's okay if someone says something, to pause for a moment and say, I need a moment to think about that. Or, maybe can we take 5 minutes? I really want to think about what you've just told me and get a moment of time to process. And for me, I like to process. So someone may tell me something, I may be talking for 30 minutes and when we're having a deep conversation, I even sometimes tell them, hey, I need can I come back to you in an hour? I really need to think about this because I need time to really process that. Just quickly responding is going to put me into judgment category. So when we understand versus respond, it's really important that we, again, listen to understand, not to respond, to understand. We want to be engaged. Some of the great ways that you can be engaged and show someone that you're a great listener is to take notes, to nod your head, and to ask good questions. Now, one thing about nodding your head that there's a lot of research around, and these are typical, not always, these are not absolutes, but typically we're talking like in the 70 to 80% range, that when someone who is male, who identifies as male, says to you or is nodding their head yes, they typically mean yes, I agree with you. And someone who identifies as female, typically, if they're nodding their head yes, again, this is 70, 80%, not always, they are saying, I hear you. When I learned this, it changed my life forever because I realized that my wife was nodding her head yes, she wasn't agreeing with me. She was just saying, I hear you. And so if you are telling somebody something and they're nodding their head yes, you may need to try to figure out, are they saying yes, I agree, or are they saying yes, I hear you? Because that's very, very different. So we want to ask questions. I notice you're nodding your head, yes or no. Are you saying you agree, or are you saying you hear? Help me understand. That is, if you could take that one away and implement that in your life, you'll probably be a 9 times better listener in about 10 minutes. Because we assume we're getting this feedback from somebody and we're thinking they're on the same page with us and they're not. Men are typically misunderstanding what's happening when a female is nodding their head and vice versa, right? They're getting two different messages because each is doing something different. And again, there are no absolutes here. There are plenty of people who they're nodding you may not be able to make an educated guess on just based on what you perceive their gender to be. So it's a good idea to continue to ask questions. And then make sure you practice not responding until later. This was so hard for me to do when I first really started working on this years ago, because immediately people would talk and I was like, oh, I already know the answer to this. I already can solve their problem. And they want to talk. And I was like, just cut it. I got it for you. I can solve it. And I realized when I started practicing this and listening all the way that they had a lot more that was in that question, had a lot more going on in that conversation, and I would have cut them off and not gotten the whole picture. And there was so much more context and information in there that was really going to help me help them in a much better way. So even though it's hard, try to not respond until they have completely finished all the way and like stop talking, right? Or wait until it's been 30 seconds or whatever you need to do to really wait until you respond later. And then this is another really, really great one, is to repeat back what you heard. Someone comes to you and says, I'm really, really mad at Bob. Okay, what's going on with Bob? And they tell you, and you say, okay, well, what I'm hearing you say is, whenever you reach out to Bob, he's very slow to get back to you. And when he does, it's very, it's a one word sentence or whatever, and that's upsetting you. And they might be like, well, it's not exactly why I'm mad. I'm more mad that he's just not getting back to me. It's not that he's repeating or responding so succinctly. It's just that it takes so long. Okay, so what you're really mad about is that it takes so long. Okay, and so you begin to repeat back what you think you've heard. Again, this is why you, as a listener, are responsible, because people, when they're mad, when they're anxious, when they're sad, when they're frustrated, they're not good communicators, period. And yet we expect them to be. And so we need to make sure we repeat back what we think we've heard so we can be clear to then advise, to then give action, to then deal with whatever is going on with them to ensure that we have a better outcome. And then, so inside of this repeating back category, I remember years ago doing some negotiation training, and I learned this concept of 3+. Now, sounds pretty simple. Actually takes a little bit of practice. So if someone tells you something really important and you think you've got it, it's really important to repeat it back to them 3 times. Now, from a listening perspective, this ensures they're telling you they're really mad at Bob and going, okay, I'm hearing that you're really mad at Bob because he doesn't get back to you quickly. And they go, yeah, okay. So if we could get Bob to respond back to you in a more timely manner, you wouldn't be mad. Well, there's also, and so you may find out there's another part. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so I'm going to speak to Bob. We'll find out about how we can get back to you. Now, I've said it 3 times. If they're in agreement, you've really nailed the right issue. You're really dealing with the right thing. As you're repeating it back, you will notice if you're not quite there, if it isn't quite right, they will change it. They will articulate it a little bit better. They will help you refine the issue, which will again help you be more effective in dealing with whatever's going on with them and them feeling like they're heard and that you're a good listener. This also works wonderfully well in negotiations where you say, so you're saying if you'll buy this product if we give it to you at this price, and you repeat that back 3 times and they say yes 3 times, they're very, very likely to move forward with that. But if they are unwilling to say yes to you those 3 times, they're not really telling you the truth. Right? You can kind of find the holes in that. But I found this to be super effective in the listening category. So repeat back key information, get the validation 3 or more times, ask questions to clarify if they're changing that or it's not staying, on point, and even ask them to summarize it back to you. At the end of a meeting, at the end of a maybe difficult conversation, I love to do this. Hey, just so I'm clear, can you summarize for me what you felt like we discussed or what we decided on or what the outcomes were that we're going to put in place, just so I'm clear. And then they repeat it back and you might go, oh my gosh, they left out one of the biggest ones. And you say, hey, I noticed you didn't say this. Is that important to you or not? And then, oh no, well, that's not that important. These other ones are. Oh, wow. I totally thought that third thing was super important. So getting them to summarize it back. Did they hear you? Did you hear them? And are we on track? Now, I know this sounds like a lot of things, but they're all small little skills that if you can begin to practice and implement them, you will find that people find you to be an incredibly good listener. Let's dive into another area that's really important around listening, and that is group thought. Often we will choose in a meeting to not listen as much if we feel like we're just going to end up going along with the group anyways, or we feel like if other people aren't going to listen to us because they're going to go along with the group. So we want to deal with group thought inside of our collaborative meetings, our team meetings, to encourage others to continue to bring up their ideas, their concerns or questions, so that we can make sure they feel heard, right? That they're being listened to. So we typically ask everyone to come to their own conclusions before considering those of others. This feels like opposite to what a lot of times we're being told. We're told, we should be open to everyone else's ideas and thoughts. And yes, that's true. But if you know, hey, we're evaluating these 5 different softwares, come to your own conclusion. Do your own research. Do the research. Come to your conclusion. I think this is the best one. Now, then step back and be willing to listen to other people's opinions. But if you walk into it with no opinion because you haven't done the analysis, then you'll end up just going along with what everybody else wants to do because they seem like they know what they're talking about. right? So we want to come to our own conclusions first, then consider others. If you feel like it's going to be difficult for you to throw out a controversial idea or to disagree with people, just ask for their permission. Meaning, hey everyone, these are great ideas. It feels like everyone really wants to go this one direction. Would you mind if I disagreed for a minute? People always say yes. They always say, sure, no problem. We'd love to hear this. And it takes that pressure off of you that people are going to be mad at you or they're not going to like what you have to say, or and actually gets them to think about their conclusions in a different way. And if that doesn't work, another way to do it is to say, well, what if we didn't do this? So maybe we're all going to pick a new CRM and everybody wants Salesforce. Okay, everyone feels like Salesforce is the best one. I get it, cool. But what if we didn't pick Salesforce? What else would we do? Just let's just take that one. Let's put it aside. What else is out there? What is a good platform to us to consider? And they may go, oh, if we didn't pick that one, we would pick this one for sure. Well, why is that? And then you might be able to start to get different opinions, make sure everybody feels heard. You may still end up picking Salesforce in that example, but at least you got a conversation going by just asking people great questions. We can always feel like, make people feel like we're good listeners when we say yes to them. Saying yes is probably the easiest way you can right now make people feel like they're heard and that you're listening to them. Can we meet on this issue? Yes. Can I get your support on this? Yes. Now, it might be yes and yes, but to help you there, right? Maybe you don't agree with their assumption uh, of the facts, or maybe you don't end up agreeing with what they think is the issue. But when we say yes to them and agree to hear them, agree to listen, agree to consider the solutions that they have, they will feel heard. Feeling heard and listening to people doesn't mean we have to ultimately agree or do with what they want. That's not a part of what makes you a good listener. It's about really understanding what they're trying to tell you, being able to really see it from their perspective, and to make them feel like even if you end up disagreeing with them, you at least understood what they had to say. I personally think if we had a lot more of this in our social and political discourse, we could probably get a lot more done. But we're talking about business today, and we have a bigger impact there, probably a more micro impact on that today, for us to be able to really make sure that we hear people of different perspectives by being willing and saying yes to hear it, to talk about it, to even consider it, to experiment it, to go down that path with them instead of just saying no immediately and turning off any sort of conversation. Now, to the sort of second step, we talked about all the different tactics and the cognitive biases. I did want to review some of the more popular meeting structures that we have in place here at AccuSource and People G2 that I think really help us ensure that listening is important, right? That it's good for us, and that we set up the right platform for us. So we want to make sure that we have the right amount of people inside of a team. So teams should be self-forming. They should be 5 to 7 members. You're not going to be in a situation where people feel heard if you have 25 people on the call. That is not a meeting where people get heard. That is a webinar. That is clearly a, hey, here's what's happening, so we're reporting down. If you want people to feel heard, 5 to 7 people is the max. It might even be one-on-one. It might be one-on-two if it's a really important issue, right? Or somebody's really struggling. But it can't be 25 people and then go, oh, how come no one feels heard? How come no one thinks that they aren't getting their ideas up there? Well, how can you when there's that many people on a call or in a meeting? So smaller group sizes is where listening really happens. And then, those groups have to make sure that they establish what does success look like, what does failure look like, and ultimately how will they deal with conflict if they want to continue to be healthy moving forward inside of that group dynamic. So if your customer service team meets every week, what's success to them? Is it their ratings? Is it their call frequency? Whatever. What's success? What does failure look like? So if they did if certain things were happening, that would mean they were failing. And if they disagree, how are they going to deal with that? Right? What does that strategy look like? This is how we set up a good team to allow for good listening. And then we need to have good meetings. So there's 3 meetings or 3 or 4 meetings here that we do that are really, really awesome. Go through them very quickly because I'm sure some of you have heard these from me before. But a cockroach meeting is our most popular. It's 15 minutes or less. It's one topic only. Anybody can call it. I have a problem. I have a cockroach in my bathroom. I need help. I just need to get this one little cockroach out of here. Can 4 or 5 of you hop on a call with me real quick and just help me? Just real quick for like 8 minutes, 7, 8 minutes, and that's it, right? That allows people to be heard. I have a problem. Can you all help me? Cool. I'll show up for 15 minutes or less. We're only going to talk about this one issue. We're not going to add in other issues. We're not going to go over 15 minutes and turn into an hour-long meeting that wastes my time. This allows people to raise their hand and say, I need to be heard. I need help, right? They don't have to wait for their one-on-one with their manager or wait for that team meeting that happens on Monday mornings. They can just get help immediately by asking whoever is available to hop on for a quick meeting. The second one is an ostrich meeting, and it works the exact same way as a cockroach meeting. It's just who can teach me something, who can help me get my head out of the sand. I don't know how to do a pivot table in Excel. I don't know how to request vacation. I don't know how to fix this thing on my computer. Who can help me? Right? Again, not having to wait to get help. This, again, gives the power, these 2 meetings, to the individual to raise their hand to say, I need help, I need to be heard. The next one is a tiger team meeting. Again, imagine there's a tiger in your bathroom. It's a much larger problem than a cockroach. This is much different. Hey, it's a large meeting. We're going to bring people together. We're going to have a big agenda. It might be an hour. It might be 2 hours. It might be an all-day meeting, right? And we know this is a very different setting. And you may be bringing up your ideas, your thoughts, or your presentation in a very specific part of this much larger meeting. And it's your job to show up here and shut up and listen, right? This is not your job to show up and talk. And you're here to help. You're here to listen to what's happening in a much more structured scenario. And this would maybe reflect your more consistent team meetings or project meetings that you may be having. And then the last one is a tsunami planning meeting, which I find really helpful for teams to do once a month. And this is where we ask our teams to have a fake meeting for 30 minutes. We say, what would happen if? What would happen if we doubled in size? What would happen if we need to hire 10 people? What would happen if we lost our biggest client? And just let the team discuss it and practice having a good meeting. And if you notice any behaviors or people who are not exhibiting good listening skills, you can go and have separate conversations with them to help them grow, help coach them over time so that your teams can be successful. And if you're noticing bad behaviors or noticing people are struggling, it's really a good idea to give them feed forward. So, hey, Tom, I noticed in the last meeting, you kept talking over people, right? You can say that, or you can say, hey, Tom, in the next meeting, can you make sure that you don't talk over people? Can you make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to finish their thought before we get to hear your good ideas? That's helping them. That's giving them the direction they need to make changes to their behavior. And then another great exercise is called bonding. So if you're struggling for people to feel heard, especially in this hybrid remote world, we want to slow down and make sure we ask people, if you can do it every day, if you can do it a couple times a week, how are they showing up? Like, how are you doing? And asking how you're showing up, I find is a better question than how are you doing? Usually, how are you doing? The answer is fine. How are you showing up? I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm overworked. I'm been dealing with a sick spouse, a sick parent, a sick grandparent, right? How are you showing up? So we can really understand where that person is today. When we leave the meeting, how are you leaving? Feeling good about this meeting? You feeling bad about this meeting? Are you worried? Are you ready to execute on with the client now? How are you leaving? These are really great questions to ask if you as a leader want to make sure you really hear how people are and you really want to connect with them on an emotional level and make them feel safe, make them feel like they can tell you what's really going on. For some people, it seems like it's just natural that they can connect with people and understand this. And I think for a lot of leaders, they need more mechanical, much more deliberate process to get this going with their teams. And this is a great way to do it. Ask them how they're showing up, ask how they're leaving, okay? And make sure that if you're the boss or you're the most senior person in the group, you go last on both of those questions. And if everyone's struggling in the group and your team needs help, nobody cares about what you have to say. You just need to be quiet and help them and deal with whatever's going on with them emotionally so they feel heard, so they know you listen to them before you ever talk about anything going on in your life. Another area, if you don't want to do this on the team level, if you want to look at this from a company level or a larger group, maybe you're managing 25 people and that just seems too hard. Other thing to do is do a one question survey. Ask your team how they're doing. Ask them what their biggest challenge is. Ask them what's working. Who's really killing it for us right now? What clients are draining us? What clients are sending us the best projects? Where do you think we should be spending our time looking into new products? What's the best service we have? Whatever the questions are you want to get them thinking about. Asking them one question each week allows you to get small data points, a lot of answers back very quickly, and be able to make changes, be able to respond back to them. So again, they feel heard. If you ran a company of 25 people and you're the CEO, I would just send this out to everybody. If you're the leader and you've got 25, 30 people you're managing and you're in a bigger organization, I would just send this out to your group once a week. It is amazing how this one quick thing can help your team feel like my boss hears me, my boss reacts to what I'm saying. They take the opportunity, not in a one-on-one, I don't have to wait. It's just I can send them back some feedback on these different prompts, not just, well, what's going on this week? No, where are we doing great? Where are we struggling? What system, what program should we think about replacing? Whatever these things are to get people talking. It's a really great way to do that. I want to thank you all for being a part of today's webinar and for AccuSource and PeopleG2 for sponsoring this. Certainly, if you'd love to find out more about why we're have these great awards and do such an awesome job at providing background checks and drug testing, we'd love to talk to you. But I'm going to turn this back to see if there's any questions that we may have, and certainly want to hear from all of you. If anyone has any questions, my email's there if you want to ask something specific. Otherwise, again, you will get a copy of this presentation and the recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Chris. So now we're going to dedicate the remainder of the webinar to addressing the attendees' questions. So one of the first questions that we got was, what should you do when you accidentally cut someone off and they get upset and shut down?
That is a really good question. So thank you for asking that. I think you should just be honest. And you might say, hey, I realize I cut you off. I realized I got excited. I realized that I allowed my emotions or whatever to jump in. Can we back up? Can we start over again? Can we just, let's go back to where you were, we were talking. I realized I made the mistake. I realized I did that. I'm sorry. All right, I think if you just recognize it and you're open and you're honest, or you tell them, you start talking about that and I got really excited and I realized I cut you off. That's, I have found, the best way to just take responsibility for your behavior, admitting you understand that you didn't, you weren't correct or you made an error. We all do it, right? I've been practicing being a good listener for years and I screw up every day. And so you just being open and honest to people and maybe asking for a restart, that's a good way to do it.
Great. The next question we have is, what should I do to help my team be better listeners when we're remote?
Yeah, great. Love that question. So I love the bonding exercise if we do that. But I think one of the great things that we can do is to ask everyone to go around the room and summarize what they heard, to ask different people to take turns taking notes and sending those notes back to everyone after an important meeting so we can kind of see how they're doing, how they're getting it. In a remote setting, even though we gain so many things in remote, we lose the body language. We lose seeing that someone looks like their arms are crossed or their legs are crossed, or we lose sometimes that ability to notice that they're not paying attention, and or they can be fooling us that they're paying attention. And so we don't always know. So we want to put in some mechanisms to make sure, and I don't mean like to call them out or try to put them on blast or try to catch them. Excuse me. I just mean if everyone goes around and tells you what they think they heard or what they thought was the most important part of the meeting, we can make sure we're all on the same page. Because if 4 out of the 5 people say one thing and the 5th person says something else, that's an important thing to talk about. If they all say something different, you as a leader need to know, geez, my team is not aligned yet. We are not connected yet, and we need to keep talking. So creating that feedback loop is really important in remote work.
Fantastic. Another great question is, will this work on teenagers?
Absolutely. I have had 3 teenagers, and I found some of these techniques were really helped bring down frustration levels when they, were acting like typical teenagers. I also noticed that when my teenagers seemed the most frustrated, it was when they felt like people weren't listening to them. Their teachers, their coaches, their friends, they felt like they weren't being heard, they weren't being listened to. And as they're becoming adults and they're now realize that they have value and they want an equal part in this world, it's just sort of that maturity process. It's almost like a toddler learning how to talk, and they're just sort of babbling and screaming, and it's incoherent until they finally figure out how to talk. Teenagers are almost trying to figure out how to be heard and how to find their place. So this is I think one of the best areas you can, if you're a parent or a grandparent or a sibling or something of somebody who's a teenager, this is a great place to start because this is often the underlying issue.
Great, Chris, this is going to be our last question since we're almost at the end of our time. It kind of goes back to the question prior to that one is, when you're doing a virtual presentation, how do you ensure others are listening? Like, how do you know that they're getting it when they don't answer or respond? It seems like they shut down and they don't interact.
Yeah, so I would say if you're trying to do something where it's really important, people are hearing you, and maybe more of like with your team. I mean, sometimes on these webinars, we'll even do some of this where we might ask questions and ask people to respond. We might even stop and do breakout rooms to let people stop and think and discuss and really have a moment to process, right? We might come back and ask them on the next meeting for a couple people to tell us what were some of their biggest takeaways, what were some of the things they really thought about. And if we are doing that practice over and over and over again, people are in that mode of, well, it's important I listen. I know I'm going to be asked to listen. There's that expectation, right? Because the expectation is being tested. It's one thing for a boss to expect people to listen, but if they never test it, if they never make sure in a healthy and positive way, then you're telling people that they don't necessarily have to all the time anyways. So we want to find good, healthy ways, again, asking questions, asking for summaries, putting them in breakouts, getting their feedback. All of that is really, really important. Especially the more important it is that people are hearing this. Now, the last part to that question is, just because you're doing a webinar or a presentation and you're delivering it verbally doesn't mean you shouldn't deliver that information, especially if it's important, also in writing, right? Also in an email or also in Slack or Teams, finding additional mediums and additional moments to continue to 3+ that, right? To send that information multiple times is another way to show people it's important that you know this. It's important that you got this because I'm going to take the time to repeat it back to you more than one time. So that's sort of leading by example as well.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for facilitating this informative webinar, and a special thank you to our attendees for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at marketing@accusource-online.com. On behalf of AccuSource team, we wish you all an enjoyable day.